air and streaming on the web since 1996. This is the Cinematic Sound Radio Network.
Welcome back to Soundtrack Alley and part 2 of our analysis, and listen to the 2 scores that were written for the separate cuts of the 1985 Ridley Scott directed fantasy adventure film Legend. We did a deep dive into the film and 1 cue from each score on the last program. And on the program today, you're going to hear selections from additional scenes, and we will compare and contrast Jerry Goldsmith's score written for the European cut and Tangerine Dream's score written for the US cut of the film. Before we get into the program, I'm going to read some comments written by listeners of the program about part 1 of the show. Mark Ashby wrote that part 1 was a gem of a podcast, a fascinating program, full marks. Cole Lossie said, great show. Thoroughly enjoyed listening to it last night. Victor Field said, it's weird hearing the Brian Ferry song from Legend for the first time in years. I did tape it off the video. Ian Clark said, great show, Eric and friends. 2 hours of geek and Jerry Goldsmith heaven. Oh yes, and that German band as well. Looking forward to part 2. Over on Twitter, film_music_love said, I've just finished this, and what a great episode, and I very much enjoyed the different voices, opinions, and insights. Also, the addition of David to add a musician's view was great, in a way that Art of the Score do it. Very much looking forward to episode 2. At Jochen Weiler said, thank you for taking the time to give Jerry Goldsmith's Legend the recognition it deserves. It's such a brilliant score, truly out of this world. If you want to get your comments read on the program, just make sure that you reply to our episode announcements on Facebook, Twitter, and or Instagram, or email us your thoughts at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. And you can leave a reply on the show page at cinematicsound.net. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get back into our discussion of Ridley Scott's Legend. All right, we're gonna move on now to the next track, and we're not gonna do a comparison because I don't think there's a comparative cue in Tangerine Dream's score for this. But I love this track as it's very short, and it's called "The Armor." This is where Jack is led by the tiny fairy Una, who resembles a floating point of light, and she takes Jack into an old cavern containing weapons and armor from an ancient time. This features one of my favorite performances of the theme, and it's the first time we hear it. It's Jack's champion theme. It's absolutely fantastic. Una's music is in here as well, and it's just so much is going on in such a short time frame. Jason, let us know what you think of this cue.
It is a classic Goldsmith cue. It's one of those. It reminded me, listening to it when I first heard it, of the scores he'd done in the 70s, like even the Omen scores, like the Final Conflict, that sort of feel to it because of the grandeur of it. Particularly, as I said, the 2 themes coming out, but the brass writing is so beautiful in it, and the use of the Orna's thing when she appears for the first time to Jack, very, very subtle, very, very well done. It's what can I say? It is one of 2 minutes, but there's so much great music in those 2 minutes. Which you can, as I said, if you've seen the film, or even using the notes from the silver screen release of this score, you know what's going on, and you can even hear the beauty of the armor and what is there in front of Jack's eyes in Goldsmith's music. It's such a superb descriptive score, and there's so much going on in it, but it is another one of, it's a typical brilliant Jerry Goldsmith cue. It really is so descriptive.
Robert, you I think saw this. No, Jason, you saw this movie recently, right? Or did you just see the American version?
I've seen both. I saw both. I saw one on Saturday and one on Sunday. I've seen both versions.
So Well, and Robert, you watched it this morning, right?
Yep.
Okay, can you tell us exactly like what is happening on the scene and what's going on with the music as well?
Basically, it depends on which film you want me to talk about, but I'll talk about the director's cut and the Goldsmith cue.
Yeah, and also if you can, a little bit, let us know what's happening with the American release as well, because I don't particularly remember what's happening. But anyway,
pretty much the same. There are, it's almost shot for shot the same. The reveal of Una and that sort of thing. There is this kind of as we've talked about this triumphant Jack theme that comes through, and it's the first time he's kind of been able to get close to this, because he even says in the film, I don't know weapons, and because they needed a champion to go get Lily, so you get that you get that first hint that they're actually that he's actually going to be able to do something.
I think you can describe it as the "you're it" cue. You're the guy.
Well, Gump even says at one point, "Hey, you'll do." And so that's kind of where I get the and there's also a little bit of mystery there too, because we understand we find out the secret of what Una it is, and that she's not just a little point of light, that there's actually she can actually become a spoilers again, full size sprite, fairy, whatever. And so there's again, like I said, there's that little bit of mystery there as well. And again, this is Jason said 2 minutes, but it covers the bases really well.
Is there an equivalent to the Triumph, kind of the champion cue in Tangerine Dream's score at that moment?
To be honest, I don't recall.
There is music on the. They did score that scene, but as I said, it's not memorable.
No.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, right? Because I recall absolutely, that theme easily in Goldsmith's score, but again, not being able to remember what was happening in Tangerine Dream score. David, what's happening in this cue?
You've got that figure, that heroic kind of introduction. There's also, as you were saying, there's the Una theme, which is very kind of not derivative, but it's very evocative of French Impressionism. It's got this, again, these very lovely chords and harmonies, but it's a little more transparent. There's a transparency. It's not heavy, and it's very. It's got this kind of, there's a lot of what we call changes in the tempo, although that's prominent in Goldsmith's score a lot anyways. As you can see, you can hear that the music's actually following the tempo of what's going on narratively, and there's that sort of not a reprieve, but there's these moments which punctuate the different thematic definitions, and this is another case where you've got it moving from this kind of heroic tone to this more evocative, ethereal type of motif, narrative motif, not literal motif, a musical motif, and then you get a recapitulation of the heroic theme. And it kind of resolves, it's which you and I were, of course, saying that's more of a cadence that we associate with The Edge, but he did it first here, or at least that was one of a notable time that he had done that.
Yeah, I love that ending. It's just, oh man, just those feelings. So
and then there's that transition at the end of the cue to the next scene with the goblins and darkness, with that weird looking chord, synthesized chord at the end of it.
Yeah, it's magnificent. It's a short cue. It's just over 2 minutes long. But again, just listen to that triumphant, that hero theme. And again, composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith and performed by the National Philharmonic Orchestra and Chorus. We're now moving on to the dress waltz, maybe the most famous cue from the score, written before the film was made. Had to be, because the choreography for the scene was done to the music, and which is why it doesn't make much sense when you hear Tangerine Dream score to this sequence. But it's a really eerie sequence. Lily is being seduced by darkness throughout most of these moments in this film at this point, and she, correct me if I'm wrong, she runs into this room with all these jewels and things of that sort, and her character basically transforms physically. I mean, her outfit changes, and then she's completely seduced by darkness, and she starts off with this devilish dance, and it's all like I said, choreographed to this incredible cue written by Jerry Goldsmith, which is just one of the weirdest, strangest things I've heard, because there's kind of like conflicting emotions are happening at the same time. There's some weird things. It seems like there's two ideas that just want to rip apart, but stay bound together. And I think that's just an absolute stroke of genius, and I'm sure David will let us know why that is. But Jason, let us know what you think about the dress waltz.
Well, it's an important cue, not just for the film, but also for the career of Mike Ross, because the very first thing actually recorded for Jerry Goldsmith was the dress waltz, and that's the reason, one of the reasons why he got the score, the complete score, with him engineering it. It is, as you said, it is a superb cue. It's one of the highlights of the score, and it just bedazzles you with the sheer beauty of it, the increasing speed of the music, and you've got to admire the orchestration by Alexander Courage really coming to the fore here with this cue as well. It really, because this is a man who's done a lot of music cues done a lot of orchestration on musicals as well, and I think it's one of the important pieces of this cue is his involvement of it, because it really does. It's just like a whirlwind. You can see it as a seducing. It's more. You can feel the seduction going throughout the music, and it is just it's just wonderful. Seeing the visuals for the first time was amazing for me, because it's a fine performance by the actor Miyazawa for the dance. It's beautiful. The choreographer was the famous British choreographer Arlene Phillips, who worked on that, and it shows, and she did a really great job on that, because it really does show the seduction of the darkness to Lily. And as I said, at the end of the cue, she's transformed into this weird-looking black dress as well at the end of it, and going. If you're going to talk about Tangerine Dream, you can see that when they do the music for this piece, they do actually just do it the same. They do a dress waltz of their own, but you can see that the choreography is not to their music; it's definitely to somebody else's. And the scene works because of Jerry Goldsmith's music, and it's not. You could rescore that, but it's not something. It's definitely. You can clearly see on that version that it's not there. He's not dancing to that music. But it's another. As I said, it's a real highlight of the score, and I'm very interested to hear what David's how he breaks it down for the layman like myself.
Yeah, before David, let's hear what Robert has to say.
Jerry sells the temptation here, the conflict that Mia Sarah or Lily is feeling, as she doesn't want to, but she's just seduced by the jewels, she's seduced by the dress, and it's hauntingly beautiful, and it's something that sticks with me long after the film and is over, and that scene alone as well, just the visuals of that dress dancing. And then the combination of the two characters, it's a beautiful scene, beautifully scored.
I love the crane shot when you get to that really big brass statement, the very Straussian part, of where you pulls back and you see the full room, and those two characters are engulfed by it for a moment, and then it kind of dollies back in, or cranes back in, because it's a fairly tight shot scene. There's a lot of close-ups of both of the Wraith and Lily, and you don't get a sense of the scope of the size and the magnitude, except for that part where the camera cranes up, and then you see this huge vacuous kind of room. It's really amazing.
I agree. So, David, let me know if I'm wrong. I mean, are there like two ideas like conflicting here that are just kind of like wanting to go their separate ways, but it just is not happening?
It's a very complex harmonic. I know I keep kind of regurgitating, recapping, or repeating this idea, because I think this is, again, something that's woven throughout the score very consciously, that the more notes in a chord, the more notes, or what we call harmonic extensions, it creates this sense of dramatic ambiguity. And this, I think, is probably the cue that where it most obviously culminates into that ambiguity, because you've got this kind of alluring kind of beginning. It begins very quietly. You've got the harp figure kind of playing sort of a G minor. See, this is almost like a whole tone chord. It's an augmented chord, but a whole tone chord, as we probably all know, is that it's that whenever someone's going into a dream state, I'm dreaming of something. Oh, but anyhow, that's been used for decades to suggest a dream state, and Goldsmith is kind of exploiting those types of sonorities by going from this almost a jazz chord to and Ravel, as I was telling Eric this, Ravel actually was very influential on jazz musicians in the mid 20th century. So they borrowed a lot of the harmonic principles he was using in his music and expanding upon them in a jazz context. So when we hear some of these ideas, we associate them with jazz, even though they originated from a French composer in Europe. But having that kind of culmination of this harmonic sophistication is probably narratively one of the most important parts of the film, because it represents the turn of and the turn of the tide, where you've already seen the beginning of one of the unicorns has been slain. And it looks like things are kind of progressing in a bad way, but Lily still up to that point represents this purity, and this is where her purity is corrupted because of darkness. So you've got this, and the interesting motif here is that there's been a huge history of horror films making evil be grotesque and scary and vile, but if you go look further back in literary history, you'll find that a lot of these nefarious characters were actually very seductive. Dracula was this romanticized kind of character. So I think that's where this duality comes from, is that darkness, even though he looks like a demon, he's presenting these things that are very seductive, and he's not this hideous Linda Blair kind of Pazuzu thing from The Exorcist. He's got this draw to him, and I think the music perfectly reflects this in the construction, in the sonorities, and in just the tempo. And again, Goldsmith matches the action perfectly with these ritardandos and accelerandos, and he builds this cue to this magnificent Straussian kind of climax.
And with that, let's hear the Dress Waltz, composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith and performed by the National Philharmonic Orchestra and Chorus. All right, now let's listen to Tangerine Dream's version of the Dress Waltz. Not much I can say here. I don't like this cue at all. at all. And
I can say stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to be nice. They should have just left Goldsmith's cue in, honestly, because none of this matches. It's so goofy. It is so unbelievably goofy that it just takes away everything that is building up. And that's all I can say. Jason, what do you want to say about this cue?
I've already said it. You've just said it. It's just, you know, that they are dancing not to Tangerine Dream but to Jerry Goldsmith, and you're absolutely right. They could have kept that cue in. There's no reason why they could not have left that cue for Goldsmith's score in the film. It makes a hell of a lot more sense than them dancing to the music that Tangerine Dream were providing for them. Just this cue. And as I said, I know that cue for Jerry Goldsmith's in my head. It's been in my head now for nearly 30 years. And Tangerine Dream 1 has not even come close to even appearing in my head. And that's not. That doesn't mean that Tangerine Dream are, as I said before, are not talented people. There's some good people like Christopher Franke, you know, when they do some great stuff. They've done some great scores over the years. All I'm saying is not criticising or demeaning what they can do, because they're all good musicians. But on this occasion, they are completely outclassed by one of the greatest composers of film music ever. Because it is, you know, how, you know, it's like you going, it's like somebody going to say, this is Strauss has done this wonderful waltz. It's the best waltz in the world. Now you do a better one. And it's a Harding to nothing. but they did their best, I'm sure. But it's if you heard Terry Goldsmith's cue for that for Dress Waltz, I'm probably thinking, how are we going to better that? How we haven't got a chance.
Well, maybe they thought the Jerry's version was too sweet.
More likely, yes. Way too sweet. We've got to have this down with. We've got to think of them. We've got to be down with the kids here. Let's make it for the kids because these waltzes are boring. Why is she not break dancing or doing anything like that? It makes a lot more sense.
But the problem is that ironically their cue is much sweeter, and it's very removed. You've got this. Sort of something like that, aside from my bad playing. And it doesn't change dynamics. It's kind of in the background. You get these weird stingers of whale sounds and the Fairlight thing yet again. But it's dynamically it's kind of mezzo piano, or it never gets. There's no range. Whereas Goldsmith starts pianissimo and that gets to fortissimo at points. It's got this real arc to it, and Tangerine Dreams is sort of just there. It's kind of trying to match the tempo. There is that one slight kind of retardando at the end of the first kind of phrase in there, so there is a little bit of cognizance that it should breathe a little bit, but no, I can't compare.
Yeah, Robert. Again, you're more favorable towards the Tangerine's Dream score, I guess, than the three of us are. The other three of us are. You saw this film first with Tangerine Dream's score. So when you see this scene, what are you thinking?
Why has nobody said, God, it sounds like a carnival ride? That's what the music sounds like.
Exactly.
Like a merry-go-round or a carnival ride. Because that's basically what I think of when I hear, now that I've heard Goldsmith's score and listening back to the Tangerine Dream score, I am more critical of the Tangerine Dream score, and I'm not just sitting back and going, oh, that's what they did. No, it sounds like a carnival ride. It sounds like a merry-go-round, and it just while it doesn't ruin the scene. Now that I know what the actual stuff sounds like, or that the actual Goldsmith stuff was sounding like, it does not compare. Does not compare.
David, one more thing. I mean, I use this quote from Austin Wintory quite often, where he says, you can write simple music, but it doesn't have to be simplistic. Is that what's happening here with Tangerine Dream's cue? It's just simplistic?
Actually, that's probably one of the more developed pieces they wrote. There's more kind of, it's a longer theme, which is not, is something that a lot of the other parts of the score, they just evaded them. It's more chordal compared to this. This does have that, does that pa kind of rhythmic thing with like a calliope at like you said, a merry-go-round or a carnival, which is strange, but it's got a little bit of forward movement to it. So it's totally wrong for the scene. I give them at least part marks for trying, because it seems like a more developed idea. It does unfold. It doesn't unfold enough, and it can't support the scene that it's being written for, compared to the Goldsmith, which, obviously the reason why the Dress Waltz is probably one of his most dynamic and exciting cues is because he wrote it like a concert work. So he could write whatever he wanted in a lot of ways. Like, he still had the mandate of here's narratively what's going on, but he wasn't constrained by visuals. He had that's like the ideal dream for a film composer, is scoring an idea rather than actually being locked into scoring specific moments at specific times and fitting your music to that. They basically cut the film to his music around the choreography, like Spielberg did with the last cue of Williams in E.T. I mean, that's the dream. that's the ultimate compliment too. Now, again, in Legend, it was always planned that way. It was planned that he had to write this before production, but he was just had less restrictions. So it's not surprising this cue is just, it's so magnificent because he had much less restrictions to operate within, even though it didn't seem like with the rest of the score where he was scoring a picture that hindered him at all.
Fair enough. Here is now Tangerine Dream's version of Dress Waltz. All right, moving on. We are going to talk about the big climactic cue. Darkness Falls, and what I find interesting about this cue in particular is the fight between good and evil. And Goldsmith is doing that in his score. And even during the sword fight between Jack and Darkness, Darkness is winning. And Goldsmith reflects that in his score. And that theme is just overpowering Jack's music until eventually, I mean, we get this. I just love this part of the track, and I wish I had a timestamp, but it's just that big triumphant choral piece where, you know, they finally win. And it's just the build up to that. I mean, this track is what, 6.5 minutes long. It just, the release is so fantastic, and there's nothing more I can say. I mean, when you want to say, hey, what's the most epic cue you can think of? And epic's just overused constantly, but this is truly just epic in scope, and it's a fantastic cue. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Well, the cue is 7.5 minutes of pure Goldsmith brilliance, as most of the score is. I always think of it as the payoff for the armor cue, because this is where the Jack's theme, the hero theme, is used the most, and it really, you know, it's, as you said, a lot of this scene, Jack is losing the fight, but his heroic theme stands out throughout this cue, to the point when, as you said, this wonderful choral shout of glory and success when the lights come up from the plates and he is bedazzled with light, and as Jerry Goldsmith has done a lot of great action cues in his career, a hell of a lot of good action cues in his career, and this is one of the most memorable because of its sheer, it's sheer, what's the word? It's power and its progression. It's very, it's very dramatic, and it really fits the scene so well. And it's, he's using that Jack theme so well in it, and it is as it is. It's a wonderful work, and a real payoff to what has gone before, particularly, as I said, from that cue for the armor, because that is where that theme really does stand out on its own, because Jack, with this, getting ready for the final battle between Jack and Darkness, and it works so well, so well.
Robert.
I hate going after Jason because he basically says exactly what I want to say. It's the thing is that it's a brilliant cue, and I think it's a great use of score with sound effects as well. The as Jason mentioned, the sound of the lights, or the sound of the light hitting the plates and that sort of thing. It works so well with the score, and it's a wonderful combination of those two elements that I think really sells this cue. And again, brilliant Goldsmith. I wish I would stop coming after Jason because he says everything I say.
David, what's going on in this cue that the other three, including myself, are maybe missing that you'd like to highlight for us?
No, I think you all got it. I think it obviously there's a lot of, it's a culmination of ideas and a resolution in some ways, although that's more, I think, on the ring. But this is the primary, this is the climax, the conflict of the two characters. It's interesting because I was mentioning earlier that Darkness's theme is, basically built on this open fifth. So you've got that. But if you notice, there's in this track, you've got this. So Goldsmith's kind of manipulating that, using the same intervals, but he's making it more frenetic. And it's got kind of that odd metered, kind of fractured, fragmented, rhythmic kind of jagged thing, which that's symbolizing darkness, but it's much more aggressive because he's actually fighting with Jack, whereas the cue opens up and it's portentous, but it's not as involved. And then you've got that you've kind of got that figure that comes in that sort of starts things rolling. So you've kind of got that moody beginning, and then it moves to more of the conflict where things start becoming more involved as far as the tempo and the rhythm and the energy of the orchestra. You've got that recurring figure in the synth, but you've also got it in the brass. The horns are playing that kind of fractured, darkness. And then that's being contrasted with even the unicorn. That's part of in that, and also then a much faster version of the heroic theme in the trumpets. Sort of more, animated version. So you've got all this culmination of these music ideas which have been introduced, and consciously or unconsciously, the viewer's brain has encoded these things. So when you hear them recapped, but slightly modified to be more suited towards the energy and the tempo of this scene, there is this emotional investment or that inconsistency that people have. They've been introduced these ideas, so they understand on this elemental unconscious level perhaps of what's going on.
Wow. If there was any other way of saying, hey, you know what, themes and melody are important in film scores. I mean, you just said it right there, Dave. I mean, perfectly encoded in your brain. I couldn't have said it any better. And I mean, yeah, you just, I mean, I know there are scores without themes and melodies and they work, but I mean, man, when you have these many characters, and it's just so important because it works. It's tried, tested, and true. And yeah, you said it just perfectly.
There's also some string voicings and harmonies that are very, very reminiscent of some of the Final Conflict, and I think that's on purpose. There is a religious tone to some of the parts of this cue, because there's a religious kind of overtone of this age-old battle between good and evil.
Yeah, and that's something we never we didn't address at the beginning of the show, because the script is essentially, it's very biblical. The light and darkness, and that's pretty much where its origins. That's where it all came from, and what inspired the writer to write the. Sorry, who's the screenwriter? I completely forgot the name.
William Hosberg, I think his name is.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, interesting observations. Here is Jerry Goldsmith's Darkness Falls cue from Legend, again performed by the National Philharmonic Orchestra and Chorus. right, we're going to talk about Tangerine Dream's version of, well, it's not really Darkness Falls, because on the soundtrack it's Darkness and then it segues into the kitchen cue. So I have nothing nice to say, so who wants to take over?
It's music, it's a lot of notes, but it's not as good as Jay Goldsmith's. I think that's all we can say.
Well, it's got that. They have that sitar in there, which is weird. Like, where did that come from? That
right.
makes there's no timbre need for that, or relevance or context for that. I mean, you've got this kind of it's a very weird kind of theme, and I wouldn't even say it's a theme. It's more of just like a phrase or something. And then it's punctuated. You've got this kind of low sampled choral motif. And then like that's almost like a Middle Eastern scale. That's bizarre. And then there's that in the low chorus, and then you've got this sitar thing doing some licks over it, which is, again, ambivalent is the word that comes to mind often whenever how the score impacts me. It just seems very not connected. It seems like it was just kind of thrown together, and it didn't have a lot of context.
Would you describe it generally as action music, compared to the Goldsmith effort on that cue?
So not the Darkness track, but then when you get into the kitchen track, which has the patented Tangerine Dream, I think even at the time I kind of liked that cue because it was closer to what I was used to with him, which is sort of this kind of synthetic flute figure. It's like a repeating idea, and it's going on, and then they start embellishing it with different chord stabs and different types of things, but it's kind of got that hypnotic loop, that sequence that their other really better known stuff was very effective at. Like Thief had all these really interesting repeating lines, and they were layered on top of each other, creating some really neat polyrhythms and some really cool synth tones, and how the different synths would kind of blend together. That was sort of their patented thing. That was their, even in Risky Business, you'd have these kind of ostinatos, which then they would have play like a sustained chord over, but there'd be something rhythmically interesting kind of going on. That was kind of the closest they got to, I think, their comfort zone or wheelhouse. But the problem is it's that kind of approach doesn't work for this. And I would think the one thing I was going to say earlier as a sort of an overview is I think the only thing that could have worked, that may have worked against Goldsmith's score for more popular acceptance, maybe even at the time, is that it is more reactive to the events on screen than most of his other scores. Like, he certainly would follow the action and catch the action in lots of his great scores, whether it's First Blood or Papillon or Star Trek or what have you. I mean, he never was insensitive to that. But again, I think he loved to really focus on the subtext of a scene, so it wasn't as what we call Mickey Mouse, as you guys know. I think potentially some people misinterpreted some of what he was doing, which was dramatic expression, like a stage work, like a ballet, as being too literal as to what like he was trying to describe in the score. So maybe that's what freaked out producers, or the audience didn't quite connect because it seemed like a very regressive idea, or what they would perceive at the time as old-fashioned, and they wanted something that was kind of like mood music, like Tangerine Dream, that it's supposed to acknowledge the mood and then underscore that, but not be so reactive. And then that's what I get from this track the Tangerine score altogether is it's there as a presence, but it's not getting in the way, but it's also not doing anything either. It's not helping to elevate the narrative.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's exactly what it's not doing. It's really not doing anything, which is just, I mean, that's bad film music. Just bad. It's just there.
It's not satisfying film music for sure.
Yeah, it's just there and just kind of floating on top and not really. That's the thing. It doesn't have anything to say, and that's a
it
big
doesn't
problem.
add to the scene.
It's filling space.
That is exactly it. It's just filling space. Robert, any thoughts on this cue in particular?
Not really. Again, I have. It's kind of all been said. So what
Let
do you
Robert
want?
go first next time.
No, the thing is that
We
it's
could alternate.
well. The thing is like, I mean, I don't mind going last, but the thing is that I mean, when you've got this divisive of a score, when you've got one score that serves the film well and was originally written for it, and one that kind of was written after the fact, you're going to get that disconnect.
All right, that'll do it for another episode of Soundtrack Alley. Thanks to Randy Andrews for letting me host and moderate this crazy and wacky crew. This has been a fun episode, and you know what? The four of us definitely have to get back together again at some point and just talk film music for a couple hours and and not really have a topic. Let's just go with it. This is way too much fun. This is just way too much fun. The theme music for Soundtrack Alley was composed by Alexander Shebel, with the Cinematic Sound Radio fanfare and theme composed by the one and only David Casina. Yeah, great episode on Legend. Of course, it seems like we all prefer the Jerry Goldsmith score. And again, we are not haters of Tangerine Dream. We just don't like this particular score in the context of that awful cut of the American cut of the movie. Robert, thanks again for joining us tonight. Do you have anything that you like to plug or promote?
Well, it'll depend on when this show is being aired, but in the coming weeks, I'll be celebrating 21 years on the air with a special program, and got a whole bunch of other things coming up in the next couple of weeks. But the 21st anniversary is very high on the priority list.
Jason, what's going on?
Well, I've got some special shows coming up. We should be hopefully having soon the interview with Austin Wintory, another 2-part special, and another 2-part special after that with Bruce Broughton. And then after that, some more composed interviews I'll be doing, and some more archives coming in the near future.
David, is there ever going to be another episode of Composer Conversations?
I hope so. I've got Amin Bhatia, who is a great composer, who's been working on some Canadian films and TV shows. He just actually won a couple of awards, I noticed, with his partner, composer Ari Posner. Posner? Shoot, I have to check out his name. Amin is a huge Jerry Goldsmith fan and a huge fan of soundtracks in general. So he's a lot of fun to talk to. He's a touch older than me, but his enthusiasm is still like when he was in his teens. He's just endlessly fascinated with music for film, music in general, and I can't wait to have him on the show. When my schedule breaks from doing ghostwriting for publications or video games or RPGs or whatever, I'd like to interview a few more people. My final thoughts on Legend, and I probably said them a few times though, but Tangerine Dream I'm still a huge fan of, at least their seminal works from the 70s and to the mid 80s. I have a huge collection of theirs. I was influenced by them. It wasn't actually John Williams that got me into doing music. It was Thief from Tangerine Dream, which got me to buy my first synth, and then from there I just kept on doing music since, and kept on buying keyboards too, unfortunately, since the last 40 years. And so they're a very profound influence in my own music career, and I would never want to denigrate them for a lot of factors that are outside of their control. So no, their score doesn't come across as well as Goldsmith's, and for all the reasons we explained. But they're still a great group and an important group in the history of electronic music development.
So don't write any letters to Derek Orsini. He really likes you. And by the way, for the record, it's 4 a.m. in the morning now, and have I got through this? I have no idea.
Hey, we really do. We really do appreciate it, Jason. Honestly, no, it's the only time we could get together, the four of us, honestly. So busy. Well, Jason, Robert, David, thank you very much for taking the time to join me today, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon. We're going to end the program with Jerry Goldsmith's finale and title cue called Reunited. What's interesting about this, and this is heard in the film, is that we get to hear parts of Sing the Wee in the end credits, and it does appear earlier on in the score on album, but you don't hear it in the film itself. But this is one of those great end credit cues, one of the best of all time, honestly, and just hearing those final kind of like what are they singing? What are they singing at the end, David? It's just so warm and calming. Right at the end of the Sing of the Wee
You mean
song.
the actual notes?
Yeah, that. But then isn't there interesting
Ringo,
chordal changes there
Ringo,
too?
Ringo. Oh yeah. It's all very warm sonorities by that point. I think there's muted strings, so everything's kind of this nice bed. And it honestly, it's like the last movement of a Mahler symphony. You feel the sense of closure,
Exactly.
emotional and dramatic closure. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Well, thanks again for joining us for this episode of Soundtrack Alley. I really hope you enjoyed it. You can reach myself at Sin Sound Radio on Twitter or Cinematic Sound on Facebook. Visit Cinematic Sound on the web at cinematicsound.net. And until next time, take care and happy listening.
Come down, sparrow, sing me good morning. Rise up, sun, like the arch of the sky. Weaving river, turn light to diamonds. When I look in my true love's eyes, young as any spring, his eyes almost sing.
Thank you for tuning in to the Cinematic Sound Radio Network. I want to thank Tim Burton for providing his voice for all the bumpers and stingers you hear throughout the show, and to David Cassina for providing Cinematic Sound Radio's intro music. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. You can find us on social media at CinSound Radio on Twitter, at Cinematic Sound on Facebook, and from wherever you're listening to us today, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review. Reviews help introduce potential new listeners to the show. While you're at it, head over to TeePublic to find yourself a Cinematic Sound Radio t-shirt and support us on Patreon by going to patreon.com/Cinematic Sound Radio. And don't forget to check out Cinematic Sound Radio at cinematicsound.net.